All right, let's see if these are actually synchronized now. I apologize for the slide. Okay, now they're on the same page. That's me. All right, let's get started. Sorry about the technology. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I want to start with a couple questions for people. How many of you, at some point in your careers, have been on a project, an initiative, an epic, something where something happened and it was like a project emergency? And people started running around, they were stressing out, people were just reacting, they may not have been very nice to each other. Raise your hands, let's see. Confident hands up right there, yes. Wow, I got 100% I think on that one. All right, little less serious. Who's been on something that had scope creep or a significant shift in backlogs, and you're just looking at it like, all right, all those plans we just made, let's just throw those away, we'll restart our back. Oh, everybody again, okay, you know where this is going. Who's been in the middle of something where you're working with your business, they learn something, and you make a purposeful pivot, and you move to a new direction, you collaborate to figure out where things need to go? Good, good. I was hoping there'd be some of those too. Now here's the real question. How many of you, in the middle of that moment, had a little bit of the, I told you so. Yeah, I knew this was going to happen, and you knew this was going to happen, and yet, at a program level, at a team of teams level, it was still a surprise for some reason. So that's my question today. Why is it still surprising? We know it's going to happen. We know we're going to face pivots. Everybody here has had that disruption in one form or another in your career. You knew it was going to change, and yet it's still a surprise. We still act like it came out of nowhere. And that's what I wanted to start digging into, because I've been there dozens of times as a developer, as an architect, as a consultant, as a change leader. It's universal, it's inherent in the work we do, and we're still surprised. And I wanted to find maybe a few tools to make it a little bit easier. And that's what I want to share today. Because these disruptions, they're not going away. They will keep happening. They're going to happen faster and faster the more you try to compete in different markets, the same market, the more competitors you have. They don't go away. But we can prepare. And I think we can make it a little bit easier and find a little better flow when those disruptions hit. Not if, but when. And the 5 things I want to cover today. The first one is we need to accept reality. You can't prepare for something to go wrong if you're unwilling to admit it might. I won't even say going wrong. I shouldn't say that. You can't prepare for something to change if you don't admit it might change. Second, in order to prepare, I want to help get the map ready. How do you understand and share a landscape so that people can work together better to navigate when things do change? Once you have that map, third topic, how do you start to anticipate where the damage will hit? Where will that change happen? What kind of disruption will you face? And you'll never know the specifics, but you can guess where it's going to have impact in your organization and what's going to get stressed when it does. And then fourth, once you have that, you can start to take proactive steps to smooth the path. You can make it easier to absorb that change when it does happen in the places it's most likely to hit. And then we get to celebrate, because if you do that, you'll take on that disruption, it will happen, and you might be able to maintain flow. You will continue delivering the value you deliver without being as disrupted by that. So that's what I'd like to cover today. And first one is accept reality. And I want to start with a fairly blunt truth that I've seen in every company I've worked with. If you want to change how you engage with your market, if you want to change your presence in a meaningful way, you have to change yourselves internally. The shape of your company must change if you want to disrupt your market in any meaningful way. And yet we don't like to accept that. I don't know any company that has changed their market without reorganizing, without adapting the structure, or taking on a lot of organizational debt. And if you picture technical debt for organizations, you know exactly what I mean there. And I'm going to use an example to go through this entire talk. It should be fairly familiar. If you've ever looked at this thing on the wall behind me, it's straight out of Organized Around Value. It's the consumer loan example. You have a mid-sized bank, small bank. They track some customers. They want to offer a loan. They go through all the steps, rate quotes, applications, underwrite it, offer the loan. We know this drill, right? Standard value stream in the courseware. We've all seen it. A couple hundred people worldwide supporting a handful of key systems. Generally familiar with this system, can follow it pretty quickly, right? Let's make it a little more complex. This bank, like many others, wants to be better. It's digital, right? We want to sell these loans online, end to end, and we're going to have to change how we work to do that. So is this a reasonable business case? Everybody wants to take things online, and maybe you did this 5 years ago, maybe you're just now getting to it. But we're going to get more loans, they're going to cost less, and we're going to earn more. Solid business case, great plan. So we set up our digital organization, we have a new experience platform, we tweak our user experience and journey a little bit to fit the online environment, and we're going to use all the existing back-end systems to make it happen. Have we seen this story? It's pretty straightforward. We know we have a new P&L. We know we need to introduce these new platforms. And if you're in any of the functions that are impacted, you know there's a few more things that happen. You need to introduce new channel management. You have new risk profiling and underwriting. Your call center might move into digital and have to support multi-channel support. You, of course, have that new development organization you have to stand up. And I could probably write 50 more things without thinking too hard. And the thing I recognize here is that to people in that area, every one of these is obvious. To people in other areas that don't have to deal with that part, it might not be as obvious. The challenge that I see is we don't bother to put them all in the same place. We might have a backlog, might be this master backlog that has all 50 epics or initiatives or features listed, but nobody reads all those. We can't see it, we can't make sense of it, we can't talk about it together effectively. All of these are knowable, but we don't see them. And that's the reality I see too often. We change the outside, and we must therefore change the inside of the organization. Those changes ripple. They go from the business down into the systems, but from there into our backlogs and teams, and from there sideways. And you've got changes randomly somewhere in your portfolio you didn't even expect. Yep. And we don't have a good way, a good habit of seeing everything in one spot so that we can make sense of it. That's the reality as I've seen it. And this is where the map comes in. And what we're looking at to do with the map is to simplify the conversations we're trying to have. If you don't have a shared view, if you don't have a way to look at things together, you do not have a common language. One of the things I love this, you could call it a map, glossary, table of contents, is that it gives us a shared language. If your leadership team doesn't have a shared language, they will be talking past each other. And when they do that, that's hard when they're responsible for designing the next evolution of your business, because that's going to have long-term impact and problems. You're working in that organization. You don't have a tool to navigate and find who you need to talk to, what problems you might want to go solve. Absent that tool, you're kind of flying blind. And the only way to get this without a map is to have lots of time together, that true team formation that lets us speak the same language, but corporate reality, we don't get that time. We're expected to come in, we do a meeting, a half-day workshop maybe, and then you're on to your next thing after contributing value. We never learn to talk to each other. If you can, go fix the time together problem. I would love for that not to be the reality. Well-formed teams at every level would be incredible. But until then, let's also be pragmatic and introduce tools that let us work together more effectively, more quickly when we need to. Because what I see is too often we focus inside our value streams. Product is really focused on creating the great experience. They're thinking about the customer journey and the operational value stream. On the other side, the technology team is trying to build the systems, achieve the performance, get the sustainable quality they need, support the product in the right way. You're focused there, and that's great. You get really effective productivity and lots of great outputs when you're doing this. Right up until, well, that moment when your blind spot becomes the important thing. And that's what happens. When you need to change directions, it never starts or ends inside the value stream. The pivots catch the edges. They hit those edges of the space you pay attention to and hit the gaps between the parts of the organization. And this is where I really value the map. I want to be able to see where those edges are, because otherwise we get that cascade I talked about earlier. The business sees something, it goes into the systems, into the backlogs, and we don't know where it's going to end up. That's dependency management. And when those are stressed and we have to make rapid changes because we're pivoting in places that weren't ready for it, places in other value streams across that dependency chain, that gets painful. Those conversations are not easy because you disrupted their entire quarter, perhaps, at least their next few iterations. And if you do enough of that, the relationships start to suffer. And you get friction, and people don't want to see you show up at their office door because you're introducing change. You're bringing problems. And that friction, that relationship stress, starts to trickle through the system. And you start to get delays and resistance and problems in your organization that are just because of the relationships. Not even the work introduced by the pivot, but additional delays because of the organizational health damage. And that cascades and trickles everywhere in your portfolio and slows everything down. We want to avoid that stuff. So that's where we use the map. And I literally treat this like a map. I print it out and I draw on it. Don't wait until you need to pivot. Critical warning here. Do this early. Do this as part of your lean business case. Do it when you're first thinking about new business initiatives. Take out your map and draw on it. Now, you all have one of these, right? Everybody did a value stream mapping or identification as part of setting up your teams and trains? Everybody, perfect value stream map, up to date, maps? I don't see anybody raising your hand. How many of you pull it out reliably after you're done with the initial mapping exercise and use it as a tool day to day for navigating your organization? Yeah, it's powerful. It's not meant to be a design sketch that you then throw away when you're done. So don't overcomplicate it. You mapped it out. If you didn't, just draw it for your current reality. Write down exactly what you have today, the operational value streams as you think they are, the systems as they exist, the arts, call the arts value streams, don't worry about the language, and then use that to get started, because that sets you up to navigate the changes and reduce the risk and manage that as it comes in through disruption. And maybe, just maybe, if you draw this and you didn't have it before, you might see some opportunities to set up better trains and set up better parts of your organization in a very organic, easy way. So get started by drawing it, and then mark it up. Start with the obvious stuff. The thing, you might be like, why do we even need to write that down? Of course we're going to create a new value stream. Yeah? Well, highlight it. Show this is what we're doing so that people don't have any doubt or any confusion. I love to quote Patrick Lencioni, say something 50 times and you're just starting to be heard. Draw the picture, make it clear. Highlight the less obvious ones. Whoops, wrong button, I apologize. Highlight the less obvious ones that are obvious to people in the different functions and in the different areas. You're having these conversations. You're starting to learn where there's going to be impact in the business. Don't just throw that in a backlog or take notes. Make it visible. This is a way to navigate, so highlight it on the map. Show who's going to be impacted, what systems are going to cascade, what operational groups have to perhaps have new business processes or new ways of thinking about things. Now go outside. Look at where you and other groups are impacting the same customers. Because if you change how you interact with customers, they will have to change as well. And if you pivot your customer engagement in a certain segment, that's going to have a ripple effect on other leaders and other value streams. So highlight some of that and understand where your customer engagement and experience changes will impact the overall customer experience. And then the obvious one, if you're in a development role, highlight the solution dependencies. Highlight which systems are likely to be part of that dependency cascade as you build your new capabilities. Because I don't know of any significant organizations that don't have multiple layers, multiple development groups, and some degree of cascade when you're trying to build something new. So highlight that. Show where the impact is going to be. And then when you put it all together, wow, so I kind of just said everything can break, right? Well, and I hate to say it, but to a certain extent, that's the truth. When things pivot, it could go anywhere in the organization. That's the reacting to the market. That's organizing around value, is being prepared for those changes. But what you're really doing is preparing for that change. Think about this like a Google map. You don't need to know every street and its status every minute of every day as you're driving to work. You don't need to map out the whole city all the time, but you have that map. And when you see the bright red line in front of you and you know that you're about to hit that traffic jam, you're not like, oh, let's turn left and see what happens. You can say, okay, I know there's a road that connects over here. There's a side street that nobody knows about. I can weave through here, and then I can get back on the other side of that traffic jam. And you don't have to know exactly where the traffic jam is going to be or how many cars it's going to be or how long it's going to last. You've created the groundwork, you've learned the map, so that you can navigate that when it happens. And that's what we're looking for here. Don't be overwhelmed by the fact that everything anywhere can break. Just understand where things are and where the change could happen so that you can know who to talk to when it does. And that's the next big point. Every one of these dependencies is a human relationship. And we tend to forget that, I think. We look at pictures, we look at diagrams, we look at backlogs, and we it's way too easy to reduce everything to just processes and lines and entries in a ALM tool somewhere. No, every single one of these things is a human. And the way to fix them, well, the harm they will cause, we'll start on this side first, is relationship harm and human harm. You're cascading disruption into people that aren't ready for it. And how many of you just love change when it comes out of nowhere? Does anybody revel in it as much as I do sometimes? Yeah, the front row knows what I mean by that. But you're impacting humans in a big way here. And I just want to keep this front and center. When change happens, it disrupts people. And the way to get out of this is to start working on the relationships. When something changes, the power is knowing who you need to work with to start navigating, to already have a trust basis with those individuals. Because then you can go have a conversation and say something like, you know, that thing I warned you might happen a few months ago if this happens, are we ready for it? Because it kind of just happened. And clearly going to be more specific than that, but that's the kind of thing that comes up, and it makes it easier. And when you do that, you earn the privilege of changing with people. You can go along with them and they'll come along with you, as opposed to inflicting change. How do we get them to do this for us? And nobody likes to be on the receiving end of that. Nobody wants to be gotten to do something. So we have a map. We accept the reality that things will change. We have a green button instead of a red button. Sorry about that. I'm not used to this clicker. How do we anticipate the nature of those problems? And there's 6 lenses, and this started out as the entire talk, and then I realized there's a lot of context that need to be built around it. But there's 6 things that I've realized over my career that if I pay attention to these areas, at the edges where things are likely to go wrong, I'm more likely to be ready for those things to go wrong. And we'll briefly cover them. Differences, and these are all about differences. So as you're looking at 2 different value streams, as you're looking at the relationship between an operational or development, or one art and a different art, as you're looking across these edges, do they have different visions and strategies? Do they have different architecture quality and state and ways of working? Do they have different funding approaches? And I'm not talking like the official company process. I'm talking about the way money gets moved in practice based on the people that are in a given area. Do they have a different professional culture? And I'm talking like that professional engineering ethos versus move fast and break things ethos. Like people just have different attitudes towards work in different groups. Different ways of making decisions in practice. Again, not the formal process as prescribed by the company, but the idea that it works differently for different groups based on their reality. And finally, how do they actually get work done? Their process and their approach. I can have 3 different groups that use SAFe, and they all use it completely differently, and it might not even be recognizable as the same framework. So let's go through in each one of these one at a time. So strategy and vision. You've got that digital group that I talked about. So all of these are the same example hiding underneath. I know there's busy slides. Don't worry about the details. You've got a digital group that wants to automate underwriting. They want to make everything quick, and they want to sell 90% of their loans with no human contact whatsoever. Powerful goals, improve the business, great outcomes. Meanwhile, you've got the retail banking that's trying to decrease customer return visits because that makes people happy. And to save money, we want to reduce the time per loan officer. Also good goals, right? Problem is, if digital is successful, retail just failed. Because all the easy loans just got taken and finished online, so only hard loans get in the door on the business, on the retail side. You just guaranteed one of your groups will fail. That edge is going to create friction when you need to change direction. So what do you see? You recognize that other groups, if they're not paying attention, they don't understand your goals. They might not even have read them other than corporate scorecard level. They certainly will not share your urgency, especially if it goes against their goals. And there's no easy way to solve this. I guarantee it. There is no easy way to find and solve all of these in a company. I have tried and failed. But if I start listening and I step back from my needs and I understand the other group's goals and needs, at least I can be ready for what's about to happen when we do have that conflict. And you might discover a few things. You might be able to go more senior in the organization and fix the goals, but you're not going to get all of them. So at least you're ready to understand people's behaviors and relationships when things change. Next, architecture, state, quality, experience platform, new, digital, exciting, it's service-oriented, everything's real-time, and this is beautiful in every sense of the word, architecturally and as a user. Meanwhile, core banking, let's just say their systems are a little older. They've had to put some pretty significant tweaks, hacks, I'm not sure what the right word is, but they've had to work really hard to get to modern performance standards down there. They're kind of heroes. I mean, it's pretty impressive what they've done with those old systems, right up until they're now getting 3 requests per week for simple new digital APIs. And we're going to see stress there, right? The simple requests that you're making to this older group, it's actually quite hard behind the scenes. You don't understand necessarily. Sounds like excuses, but it's hard. The data may not be in the right space. It might be poor quality. You might not even be able to get the data you expect to be together into the same place, because that's a real problem. Your needs, very likely, when you ask for this quick, simple API, they're going to hit a capacity bottleneck somewhere, a team that just has no space to do this stuff, or maybe they're going to hit right up against an architectural monolith. Those edges matter, right? These are the things that take a pivot that should be easy and make them really hard. Funding models. You've got your digital art. Needs a steady stream of little changes. Great, they're fully empowered. They just come right at you. Funded for a year. Meanwhile, you've got the core banking group, the servicing group that has their annual capital budget. They've got this little discretionary OpEx pool, and we're going to drain that pool in the first quarter. And it's going to go everywhere in the portfolio, and we're going to have all those challenging discussions about where the money comes from to finish this work. Nobody's ever been in those, right? And when you have different funding models, when you have different ideas about how money gets spent, that creates incredibly high friction. And the worst I've come across navigating dependencies is when you have a continuously funded group, great LPM implementation, trying to get things from a project funded group, or yeah, we fund the team, but it's really all pre-allocated to different capital efforts. And when those transfers hit, when you have to try to figure out that, suddenly finance is involved, accounting gets involved. There may not even be a mechanism for doing that in the corporate world. You're creating a lot of friction in the time of this change. Collective culture and beliefs. These are the ones that really get me, because this is one of those you can look at and say both sides are completely right, and yet we're still into trouble. You've got digital, move fast, break things, create the customer experience, pivot frequently, learn all the time, amazing front-end experience. And then you've got underwriting, who sees themselves as the defenders of the bank. Yeah, we've seen marketing efforts like this before. They try to put us out of business. Our job is to keep the bank safe, and they have a different attitude towards their work. Professional, strong, good belief system maybe, but directly in conflict. And when they demonstrate different values for good reasons, understandings get missed, you start to have expectations that aren't delivered against, and over time you get active resistance and friction there. People start to actually dislike each other because they think the other side's holding out or resisting or trying to break them or something like that. And this can seep into the culture at a company level in a very dangerous way. Decision authority, how people make decisions in practice. Digital's great. They fully empowered the product owners. The dev teams take those features the product owners are writing and bring the feature requests to wherever they need to get done so that they can get the APIs. It's amazing. IT, again, they are wonderful consensus builders. They serve stakeholders across the entire bank. They want to be very cautious in how they invest their capacity. They want to make sure those epics are well understood at the beginning of the year so everybody gets what they need out of them. Opportunity for a lot of conflict here, right? Again, both sides working very rationally and reasonably, but the conflicts still arise. Every new decider, every new group that you add in will add complexity to your landscape. Just inevitable. Pay attention to the number of groups involved in any decision, and you can just, that's your exponent for how long it's going to take to get a good decision. The different styles, you can get incoherence. Like, your answers make no sense to me. I've seen that where people just so talk past each other because the way they make decisions is so fundamentally different. Why do you need to go talk to your boss's boss before you can move forward? That makes no sense. Can't you just decide this? No, that person can't, even though that makes no sense to you. And the time, and this is where it gets really important. You can't learn this on the fly. You can't understand another group when you're already stressed and you're trying to make changes. The time to understand the other side is at the beginning, when you have to just invest the time and energy, and you just don't have that time and energy when things are changing. So invest on this one early. And then process and approach. Last one here, digital, 6 weeks PIs, or 6-week PIs, 2-week iterations. They move very quickly. They pivot even during iterations. Again, very quick, very fast, wonderful system. Meanwhile, servicing IT, they've got a lot of strategic vendors, big partners. They have long-term contracts, and they've carefully aligned their PI calendar around all of their major platform releases. It's quarterly, and it actually works really well. They have one of the best sets of relationship with vendors of any bank. And yet, when those two groups try to work together, they're going to break each other. So those cadence mismatch, you all remember the slide from Leading Safe where it has the big boom cloud on it? That's what happens. And again, frustration, upset with each other. And this one gets dangerous because you can't pivot as fast as each other. You'll get the job done anyway. Every group I know will find a way to solve the problem anyway, right? And that's where quality issue comes from. That's where technical debt creeps in. That's where customers feel a lot of pain because they have experienced mismatch across products. Because somewhere there was a mismatch in cadences and it cascades out and you just can't get anything done. Or you do it anyway and you break things. So what do we do about all this? We've looked at reality. We have a map. You draw on your map. You understand where on that map change is likely to hit. You've considered what form that impact will take and what kind of damage it might have. You have some lenses to help you navigate that. Now let's make it a little better. Let's find a way to find flow. And on this one, I want to be careful. I am not going to be prescriptive and say, here's the 3 answers. Your approach and what you do will matter very much based on your role, your company culture, the context and the nature of the organization around you, and the degree of overall stress that's kind of ambient in your company right now. First thing, though, is respect your history. You wouldn't be in this conversation if you didn't have enough experience and earned lessons to help you see what's going to go wrong. So get together, find the other people that are likely to be impacted by this, sit down and just do some storytelling. What always goes wrong? I mean, how many of you could close your eyes and write down a list of 10 things that seem to go wrong in every effort in your company? I mean, be honest about this stuff. That's back to the accept reality. Make the list, tell stories, maybe do it over drinks if that's more appropriate to your culture, and capture this stuff. Build that list of what goes wrong as stories. Not user stories, just like narratives. And then use that list. We'll go back and we'll look at the map. Look at the edges. Look at the lines between things on the map. And take each of those edges and spend a little bit of time. I'm not talking like hours. I'm talking like 10 minutes. And ask, what could go wrong at this edge if we had to change directions? Use the 6 lenses. And don't build the huge laundry list here. I mean, I could probably risk manage myself into oblivion by just writing 5,000 items that could go wrong. But as you reflect on them and you look at the edges and you look through the lenses, you will find a set of things that just jump out at you like, oh, we got to do something about that one, and that one, and that one. You've got a handful of the top items that if you change direction, you know will break. And those are the ones you're going to invest into. Now, if you have too many, if the dependencies quite simply are unacceptable, well, we have a tool for that. Maybe it's time to reorganize around value. If there's too much that could go wrong, maybe you have the wrong org shape and you can fix that. But otherwise, let's look at the dependencies we have and start to adjust. And then combine the two. You've got the list of what always goes wrong. You've got the list of places where it's likely to go wrong for this effort. Go invest into the relationships in those areas. Look to the people on the other side of the dependency and get to know them. Have coffee, set up standing meetings. Just get to know the humans so that when things change, you've already invested in the relationship. You've already laid the groundwork for that trust. And that trust, that connection you've already created, that's what will get you through the hard times. Be open about things. So let's bring this to a close. Best time? I wish you already had these maps. It'd be great if you all had them and you used them. Ish. It's not actually a quote, if you can't tell. But go draw it. It doesn't take long. You write it down. It's not hard, but it takes focus and it takes a willingness to confront things. And that's actually my call to action. Take your big initiative. Take the thing that is top of mind for your organization right now and draw the map for it. Understand the relationships. Find where you're going to see that friction if it's a big pivot. And then persevere. Because this is actually where it gets hard. People don't always want to hear this. They don't want to see the map all the time because it's going to expose real vulnerabilities in your program and the effort. It might highlight problems with the actual business case. It will certainly show things that scare you with your chances of successful delivery. But even though it's hard, stick with it. I have not seen a case where it's not better for the company for the truth to be out there. And usually it's better for all the people involved. So go forth, draw some maps. I'm getting ready to move into questions in a moment, but first I invite you all to connect with me at any of the channels here, in the hallways, wherever you want to, open for questions and conversation. I look forward to it. And with that, we have 8 minutes and 45 seconds of questions ahead of us. If I have somebody to ask questions.
Yeah, folks, feel free to use the app, or if you have a question you'd like, we can pop over with the microphone now. Oh.
No questions from people hiding in the back.
Standing out. Great presentation, Eric. Just a quick question on pivoting. When it comes to a culture that says we'll deal with that bridge when we get to it, I found that working with teams who draw the maps, raise the risk, and present them as opportunities. Sometimes we run into leadership that says we'll deal with that when we get to it. And how would you counter, pivot, or suggest to people to continue to push forward?
Well, it's much easier if they say we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, if there's a bridge there. This isn't necessarily about trying to fix all the problems. If you go in and you try to predefine everything that can go wrong and fix it, you're doing it wrong, because if you knew in advance you needed to pivot, you would have already pivoted. But if you don't have the relationships, if you don't even know the right architect at your vendor that can help you when things get crazy, you're not going to find that person when things are already crazy. So this is all about building relationships and building a network, and half the time I don't actually ask permission to do this. I just kind of go do it. And then you look really good when you're ready. And if you show what you've done to people and they really recoil, I try to understand why. What are they hiding? What are they afraid of? What fears, vulnerabilities are underlying that? Because maybe that's an opportunity to help with something too.
Thanks, Eric. We do have one question on the app.
How do you track dangers, and at which part of the SAFE process do you start putting together contingencies?
So it depends on the level of governance and safety concerns. When I was doing apps for neonatal intensive care Class B medical devices, when I was working on federal aviation support, we had a formal risk tracking system, and I would put this kind of thing there. They're program risks, they weren't safety risks, but I'm not going to fail to use the governance that's in place. On the other hand, it might live in the social ecosystem. It might just be a conversation rather than a formal list. Despite being incredibly agile and theoretically reducing the amount of documentation, we love to write long lists as coaches, right? We don't need more long lists. Nobody reads them. So I don't track them too formally, but I do bring them into the right conversations. If they're really big, then we might make sure they're listed and there's some active features for mitigation, or maybe invest into the architecture early or something like that. When do I start doing them is as early as I notice them. Like, I don't wait. If I understand that I'm about to embark on this year-long epic, I'm going to be thinking, oh, where's that going to touch in the organization? Who's going to be impacted? Who do I need to have at the table to build it in the first place? And then to pivot if we decide we need to pivot later. So to me, this is just part of the human aspect of being a good RTE, a good product leader, even a good architect, or line manager for that point of view, is understanding the landscape you work in and understanding where there's challenges that might arise and being ahead of them, building the network, building the relationships. I love well-connected leaders of any level because they always know who to talk to. And those are the people that have probably thought ahead about what's going to go wrong or been through a lot of scars in the past. What other questions do we have?
We do. From Sarah, when you find dangers or risks on your map, how do you bring them to light?
Smart question, Sarah. Carefully. And this is where a certain degree of, I call them enterprise skills or consulting acumen, depending on which side of the line you're on, comes in, is you want to share these in a way that's generative and supportive of helping solve the problem. If you run around like it's a sky is falling moment because you found a potential danger, nobody wants to see that. But if you start to understand, okay, who's going to be involved? Let's have a conversation. Let me just ask politely, have we thought about what happens if we discover assumption X is invalid? Because that could have big impacts on this other group. And sometimes just that question is enough for a more senior leader to say, it's a really interesting point of view I should go talk to. And you've kind of already solved the problem with the question. So I approach them cautiously because these are risks. These aren't problems. These aren't emergencies. If you treat them like emergencies, we're kind of doing it wrong. This is creating the groundwork and the social constructs to allow you to navigate when things go wrong in the future. And I'm using go wrong a lot here, and I should be clear. Pivots aren't wrong. Pivots are powerful things to help you remain fit for purpose and react to learning in the environment. I mean, if you look at it one way, building the map is preparing to sense and respond, is preparing to be agile. So this isn't about when things go wrong. It's really about pivoting in a meaningful way and knowing where those are going to hit. But again, bring them up cautiously. Nobody wants to hear all the problems all at once in advance.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is from Eric. Have you seen people adopt any practices that involve making their maps visible and transparent?
I've seen a lot of people try, often out of architecture groups that have many maps that are quite useful in various forms, but don't communicate the value of using them well. I haven't seen a lot of use coming out of, let's call it the Agile process community, which is a little mystifying because we should be the ones that love drawing pictures and putting these things on walls and making this very transparent and visible. I've used them personally. I've put them on walls and had leadership conversations around them. I have a number of forms of maps I've used. I chose the value stream map for this conversation just because it's something you should already have. And if not, it's useful to build it anyway. Practices, I just draw when I need to. It's kind of like that old comment, what version of SAFe was it? When in doubt, model it out was one of the technical practices, like 3? Yeah, that kind of applies to org design stuff too and risk management. When in doubt, draw a picture. Put it in front of the wall, and then I could take the same pictures I was drawing earlier, sketch them on a whiteboard in 5 minutes. I think Christine's been a victim of many of those. And then we have a meaningful conversation. If you think back to the beginning, how long did it take you all to understand the gist of what we were talking about with the example? I just introduced a significant pivot in a business model in about 2 minutes. And everybody was maybe not perfectly on the same page, but a heck of a lot more on the same page than if I put a backlog up and started using a bunch of words at you. This is the power of the pictures, so just use them. Literally draw on them. My original intro on this talk had a lot about my background as an architect and my background as a transformation leader and how I'm bringing these together. And then I realized that was a waste of time at the beginning of a talk. But it really is bringing concepts from architecture into change leadership.
Awesome, we got one more. How do you mediate the edges between teams who have different cultures, beliefs to promote flow?
One of my favorite techniques out of Lean is an idea called vanishing clouds. Has anybody heard of vanishing clouds before? You start with the two completely opposing perspectives. This group believes this. This group believes this. Now, somewhere in the chain of logic, there's a missed assumption where one group holds an assumption the other doesn't that probably dissipates the entire confusion if we can clean up and understand what that assumption is. And usually what I do in this point in this environment is do my best to bring both of their high quality, strong professional ethics back to the same company purpose. This goes back to our opening keynote today. How do we see how each of our approaches, mindsets, and ethos connects back to the company purpose and the purpose that, in theory, we all share? Now, if we don't all share that purpose, then that's actually something where I need to take more direct action as a leader and help one of the groups understand why they should share that purpose. Because when you have a company purpose, it should be the shared purpose, not 20 different ones for different groups. But really it is just about helping to find and navigate those differences and expose how you really are on the same page and you're just serving different roles and getting there. All right, I see zeros down here, so the rest of the questions will be informal. Feel free to come and talk to me.
Thanks very much, Eric.